Well, for more perspective on all of this and this increase in violence, we're joined by Middle East expert Fawaz Gerges in London. He's Professor of International Relations at the London School of Economics and Political Science. Always good to speak to you, Fawaz. Thank you for your time. Fallujah and Ramadi, where this fighting is taking place, are considered two of the most important cities in Iraq. Give our viewers some perspective on their geopolitical significance within the country.
Well, you're absolutely correct, Aisha. Ramadi and Fallujah are in the heart of the so-called the Anbar western region in Iraq. And this is really the heart of the Sunni insurgency and revolt against the Noor al-Maliki government in Baghdad. The most alarming development in the last year or so is that Al-Qaeda in Iraq and the Levant has really found basically a refuge, receptive ground in Ramadi and Fallujah. In the last few days, more than 1,000 fighters rallying under the flag of Al-Qaeda in Iraq basically has taken over Ramadi and Fallujah. This is a very serious development. Remember, even the Americans could not pacify Ramadi and Fallujah. The Americans tried twice to take over Fallujah and paid dearly in blood and treasure. In fact, 2/3 of American casualties in Iraq were in Ramadi and Fallujah. The Iraqi government has tried 4 times to take Fallujah in the last few years, and it has not been able to do so. This tells you about the importance and the gravity of the crisis facing the Noor al-Maliki government in Baghdad.
Fawaz, as we talk about these militants, we know the war in Syria is feeding the violence in Iraq, but a point that's often overlooked is the fact that the militants who fought those U.S. troops you were just talking about in Anbar province in the years after the 2003 U.S. invasion, they actually inspired Syria's most hardline jihadists, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. So basically, are we looking at a cycle of violence, effectively, one with potentially far-reaching regional consequences?
You're absolutely correct, Aisha. You really cannot understand what's happening in Iraq today without understanding of the escalation of the Syrian crisis. Al-Anbar region, Fallujah and Ramadi borders Syria. Fighters from Fallujah and Ramadi and other places in Baghdad are flooding to Syria, both to fight on the side of President Assad and also to fight on the side of the opposition inside Syria as well. In fact, the Syrian conflict is spreading not only into Iraq, it's also spreading into Lebanon as well. As you all know, several major bombings have taken place in the last few months, and the situation both in Iraq and Lebanon is polarized along sectarian lines, Sunni, Shiite lines, and that's why Al-Qaeda now is basically capitalizing on this sectarian divide in order to find a refuge and also to co-opt more and more followers. And unless the political situation is resolved in Iraq, I would argue that Al-Qaeda will grow in strength and will gain momentum.
And do you have any confidence that the political establishment, that the Shiite-led government is ready to deal with the long-standing Sunni grievances that many have in a place like Anbar province?
Well, you know, Aisha, this is really the most important question. The question is why Al-Qaeda has gained momentum in Iraq. Why Al-Qaeda now has more than 1,000 fighters fighting in Ramadi and Fallujah. The question is, the challenge is, it's a severe and deepening political crisis. Many Sunnis in Iraq feel excluded. They feel angry at the security practices of the sectarian-led government in Baghdad. And unless Prime Minister Noor al-Maliki addresses the legitimate grievances of the Sunni community in Iraq, I would argue he will not be able to pacify the area that is Ramadi and Fallujah. Even the Americans did not basically pacify the areas. It was only in 2007 when the Americans basically co-opted the local population in both Ramadi and Fallujah and turned them against Al-Qaeda. And this is a lesson for Prime Minister basically Noor al-Maliki. It's politics, politics, and politics. and unless the political aspirations and the economic and social aspirations of the Sunni community in Iraq basically are addressed, the situation could escalate and Iraq could descend into all-out war. In fact, there's a real danger that if this insurgency spread into Baghdad, Iraq could easily descend into all-out war, like what's happening in neighboring Syria.
So Fawaz, go back to your previous graphic and to give us, just break down for our viewers, because it is so complicated, the situation in Iraq and the ethnic and sectarian divisions, and just spell it out for us, the situation. We're talking about the Sunnis and the Shias, and clearly they're long-standing divisions, but give us again that overview of those ethnic and sectarian divisions that exist on the ground.
You know, Aisha, this is again what we need to explain to our viewers. Iraq was one of the least sectarian-based societies before the American-led invasion of Iraq in 2003. What happened after 2003 is that a sectarian-based system, similar to that of Lebanon, was basically set up in Iraq. The Shiites, who represents about 60% of the population, get 60% of political positions. The Sunni Arabs, who represent about 20%, got about 20% of the political, basically, authority in Iraq, and the Kurds, who represents about 18%. Remember, Aisha, the Kurds are Sunnis, but they're not Arabs. So they've given almost 18% of political authority position. So what you have in Iraq now is that the political spoils were divided along sectarian lines, as opposed political and ideological lines. And what you have now in Iraq is similar to Lebanon, that the conflict in Iraq is divided along sectarian lines. And that's why Al-Qaeda comes in. Al-Qaeda in Iraq basically claims that it's defending the Sunni community that's felt marginalized and excluded. And that's why the government of Nouri al-Maliki, which is a Shia-dominated government, must address the political problems in order to pull the rug from underneath Al-Qaeda in Iraq that has basically been gaining in momentum and strength in the last 1 or 2 years.
We've seen the U.S. In these days where we've seen this uptick of violence get involved in terms of sending to the Nouri al-Maliki government missiles and surveillance drones. Is there more they should be doing, as Iraq, in the view of many, stands at a crossroads, is on a precipice?
Yes, absolutely. Remember, I don't think the Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki would be able to pacify either Ramadi and Fallujah or secure the political and social situation in Iraq, regardless of how much arms the Americans and the Russians send them. This is an essentially severe political crisis, and the Americans and the international community and the United Nations must impress on the political elite in Iraq to sit down and resolve their differences. Helicopters and missiles will not basically bridge the divide between the various communities in Iraq. Only a political agreement, and that's between the dominant Shiite community government in Baghdad and the various community, that basically resolve the underlying fundamental crisis that has almost brought Iraq to a breaking point. Iraq now is in the eye of the storm. It could easily go the Syrian way, or basically find a way out of this deadly embrace between the government on the one hand and the Sunni community in the Anbar region in particular.